And welcome to this meeting of the Housing Subcommittee on Tuesday the 12th of April. May I remind members that this meeting will be recorded and subsequently made available for public listening. We go on to the agenda then, please. Item 1, Sederunt and apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. We have 3 apologies today from Councillors Carson, McClung and Dempster. We have Councillor Martin here substituting for Councillor Dempster.
Thank you. Item 2, any declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you. That takes us straight on to item 3, a presentation from Mike Staples. Mike is the new CEO of the Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust, and he is here to give us a presentation on his vision of moving the trust forward and the relationship that he hopes to achieve throughout with the council. So I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. This is the first opportunity I've had to speak to you since I became Chief Executive, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so. I've endeavoured to keep the presentation reasonably succinct, but just to talk to you a little bit about where I've been since becoming Chief Executive and where the Trust is at the moment. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of project-specific issues that are raised within Jim's paper as well that you'll come on to. Okay, so the Trust, I'm sure you're all familiar with and have heard from many times before. The rationale behind our existence is the promotion and support of rural affordable housing in communities throughout Dumfries and Galloway, very much in a manner that addresses specific localised need. And effectively our constitution now affords that we'll work in any community pretty much other than Dumfries, Stranraer and Annan. So we're able to work in any community-led housing project across the region. I'm sure you all knew my predecessor, Jamie. I became Chief Executive in August, and since then it's been an opportunity for me to kind of take stock of the direction and the relationship within the region that we've had with other key strategic partners, and to consider where we're going from here. And some of those things I'll talk about in the presentation. We also have the ongoing Realising Affordable Rural Homes project, which is the project that's very specifically oriented towards community-led and community-owned housing, and that's supposed that's 50% funded by Dumfries and Galloway Council, 50% funded at this point in time by the Robertson Trust. And key also to what we're doing has been a more formal approach to our role as part of the Rural Housing Partnership, and a change in our relationship and perspective with the Scottish Government, which have led now into the emergence of the Rural Housing Fund from this month, and the ongoing investigation of the creation of a Community Housing Alliance. And these are both things that I'm going to talk a bit more about. So key elements of our work at this point in time. Development of key strategic relationships. For me, this is imperative, and it's been a critical part of my role since coming in to post. I think in my personal assessment, there was work that needed to be done on our key relationships with other strategic housing providers within the region, particularly our relationship with Dumfries and Galloway Council, and also with the housing associations. So that's something that I've been putting a lot of effort into over the last few months. Engagement with communities, I think very broadly speaking, the rural housing agenda in Scotland at policy level is more heavily driven by community-led housing and community-owned housing now than it ever has been before. And it's certainly there's been a shift in policy terms. It fits well with other community empowerment agendas within the Scottish Government, and it's an area in which we're placing a lot of our support at this point in time. We also work with private sector developers in terms of assisting planning consents around affordability on private rural housing developments, and that's in particular been via the use of rural housing burdens. We've been the beneficiary of a number of rural housing burdens, and actually in the period in which the downturn had affected the market, there had been very little activity in respect of new planning consents of a scale in rural Dumfries and Galloway to bring about burdens, but that's something that's actually beginning to change at the moment, and we've got a few new projects coming forward. We work with communities to assess very localised housing needs, really to provide a justification for communities to intervene themselves in housing demand. It's most readily done via housing survey, and it's something that we've been talking to housing strategy here about how we might be kind of sharpen up that process a little bit. We will support project development for communities, for private landowners, in respect of attempting to facilitate bringing about land. We engage very heavily with representatives of the Scottish Land Fund in assisting project planning and into project delivery with particular emphasis on funding, and thereafter the ongoing management of housing, particularly when it's owned by communities. We also will seek to participate in local and national lobbying for the rural housing movement, and as part of the Rural Housing Partnership, we've been doing that over the course of the last year with housing supply in the Scottish Government. Board of Directors was something that is pertinent to Jim's report. In coming into the post of Chief Executive, I've spoken quite a lot to our Board of Directors, which really had lost a few members over a period of time, and in terms of numbers, had been at our kind of lowest level that we would be comfortable with. We've had a look at the memorandum and articles and what our membership organisations are afforded in terms of nomination. Now, whilst from 2009 the Council did nominate to our board, these nominations haven't been taken up for some time, and we've discussed our aspiration to have Council representation both back in our Board of Directors, and it's something that we'll be asking for today as nominations from the Housing Subcommittee to our board. I see it as a critical element of supporting the strategic work that we do alongside Dumfries and Galloway Council and ensuring that you're convergent with the work of the Trust. So I'm very keen to bring Dumfries and Galloway Council back onto our board. We're also going to be bringing DGHP back onto our board as well, who have been absent for a period of time. In terms of other membership or nominations, we have Scottish Land and Estates and Lorburn on our board at this point in time, and there are a number of other elected and co-opted board members. So, point of conversation for today. The Rural Housing Partnership relates to, I guess, our relationship with the Scottish Government as our core funder, and to our kind of informal partnership with Rural Housing Scotland and the Highlands Small Communities Housing Trust, who, the Highlands in particular, are a broadly similar body to us. From this point in time onwards, we've had a shift in our core funding, which now comes from housing supply in the Scottish Government, and they've been looking for us to have a more participatory relationship with the other rural housing bodies in Scotland and giving us the opportunity to work together in terms of sharing best practice and sharing project approach, which we have been doing. And the result of that is we have a core funding package now for 3 years, but attached to that, undoubtedly, an expectation from the Scottish Government that we begin to think more acutely about where we find income from other sources. We're grant reliant at this point in time, obviously. Over the course of 2015, funding was also supplied to the Rural Housing Partnership by the Scottish Government to consider the feasibility of something called a Community Housing Alliance, which is a process that's rumbling forward pretty slowly. The premise that the housing supply guys were keen on came about after they had seen developments in England around the development of a Community Housing Alliance, which actually has developed at a far slower pace than it has in Scotland. And between the three organisations, we commissioned a consultant called Rocket Science last year to undertake a study. The idea behind the Community Housing Alliance is that it would provide a new body centrally in Scotland that would provide independent support to the three organisations, but particularly in terms of drawing in sources of private finance to the community-led housing movement that could be accessed specifically by communities, but also to give a higher status nationally to some of the products that we promote. As an example of that, I talked before about rural housing burdens, which are a very effective and important tool for us, but when prospective buyers approach lenders in respect of rural housing burden mortgages, they're not well recognised by lenders, and that tends to be a problem for us. So it's about taking these types of product and giving them a higher status nationally, and trying to use the rural housing programme as a nationwide critical mass to approach lenders. The study was done. Everybody that we were working with in housing supply in the Scottish Government moved on, and it's probably fair to say that the people who had been promoting this were no longer in post, and the new officers within housing supply have had to take their own view of this, which is certainly a view that they're fairly keen on the premise behind the Community Housing Alliance, but don't have the level of funding that was necessitated by the business plan that was done by Rocket Science. So at this point in time, they're keen to proceed with this on a 3-year basis on the premise that it attracts private match funding. And we've applied as a Rural Housing Partnership to the Nationwide Foundation. We've invited in to phase 2 detailed funding application, which will take place next month. And until we know what happens there, this will be on hold, I guess. But it's an opportunity in the future, primarily to bring more money into community-led housing. I think for us, it's an opportunity to improve the level of finance and therefore the level of delivery. The Rural Housing Fund you will know about. Scottish Government announced the Rural Housing Fund in February. It's live now. It's a £25 million fund over 3 years, 5 million in the first year, 7 in the second, and 10 in the third. Those figures reflecting their view that applications for capital to deliver houses will ramp up over the period. And there's a £1 million per annum loan fund as part of that. And we as a trust act as a support organisation for bids into the fund from Dumfries and Galloway. And therefore our aim throughout this is one, to work strategically with the council in identifying projects that come forward to the Rural Housing Fund, but two, in particular, to ensure that as much of this fund as possible comes into Dumfries and Galloway, as much of this capital comes into Dumfries and Galloway as we possibly can. Scottish Government have been very broad in terms of who they've allowed to apply into this fund. It's, I think, quite pointedly targeted towards what they call community-led housing. It's It's open to community organisations, community development trusts particularly, and we're doing a lot of support around that. It's also open to local authorities, RSLs, private landowners, private developers, with very much with a view that they're looking for collaborative projects to come forward. At this stage, it's open for expressions of interest, and expressions of interest are being used as a first cut, really. And I think already we've had maybe around 5 expressions of interest from the region that have been invited to come forward for application. And they're a mix of applications from private landowners and community development trusts. So I'm going to move on to project-specific stuff. The Monreith project is referenced within Jim's report. It's obviously one that I've inherited, and I suspect you probably all know a reasonable amount about and have been through the history of. The project has already delivered 10 units to DGHP via the Innovation and Investment Fund, and at the same time funded 3 plots for self-build that are owned by us. We acquired the overall site from funds held by the council that were ring-fenced for this purpose at the outset of the trust. Since then, obviously, DGHP units have been completed and have become occupied, and we have been marketing the self-build plots since May last year at this point in time. They, to all intents and purposes, seem like a very attractive market offer. They're £17,500, fully serviced. They will have a rural housing burden attached to any completed unit, which is effectively the trade-off, and it affords affordability, but it's a trade-off around the low purchase price. But we've actually had no substantive market interest in the plots whatsoever since they came to the market. They've been very heavily marketed. They've been very well marketed. I think it's probably a key point that any demand for self-build was assessed on this project. Project's been running for a long period of time now. That any demand for self-build was assessed before the downturn, and it's certainly our view relative to evidence that's being presented that the self-build market is very, very difficult at this point in time because prospective self-builders are finding it difficult to get mortgage finance. The project rumbles on as one in which a degree of public funding has gone on to it. And we as an organisation have a financial consideration in the project as well, but a growing concern that the longer the plots sit, the less interest we're finding in terms of the self-build sale. There's obviously been an ongoing process of communication with the community trust in Monreith Madag, and that's historically been, I guess, a difficult process. And I've worked quite hard to improve the levels of communication with the group in Monreith. I think the key to that for us is to maintain open and ongoing dialogue with them as much as we possibly can. But really what we want to ask your view around is one of going back and appraising alternate options for the 3 plots at this point in time. And there are certain outcomes that we want to fulfill to the benefit of the council and to the benefit of the trust, but also to the benefit of the community and the community trust and the land itself. Not suggesting any prospective alternatives at this point in time, but what we do want to do is go and do an appraisal of what other options might be available for these plots of land. Estill different project and another one that's referred to within your report. We have been supporting the Upper Estill Development Trust around a project to acquire some forestry land in Estill, and it's being supported via realising affordable rural homes. Nick from the Trust is here today. It's a project that we've spoken strategically to the council about for some time, and it's a project in which the Community Development Trust are very keen to acquire the land via the Scottish Land Fund. The first application to the Land Fund was not successful, but came at the very tail end of the last fund, and they've been encouraged to go now into the new Land Fund. So we're optimistic that they will acquire the site. We've helped them do some assessment of local demand. The site itself already has planning consent on it, and we're keen to to support the Development Trust to get in early to the Rural Housing Fund for capital to build houses and community ownership in this site. So you'll see via your report that the Development Trust themselves are asking for some support in terms of developing up the technical aspects of this project. And it's something I'm sure will be talked about more, but I just wanted to give you a broad outline. It's a project that we as a trust are very supportive of and feel can bring a beneficial and critical outcome to very remote rural community in Dumfries and Galloway via the benefit of the Rural Housing Fund. Okay, so this is my last slide. Aims and objectives for the trust moving forward at this point in time. For me in particular, it's about strengthening and continuing the development of the key strategic relationships within the region that are critical for us to deliver and to deliver in the right way in a manner that fits with the strategic objectives of Dumfries and Galloway Council, and also redeveloping our relationship with DGHP going forward. Our ongoing participation in the development of the Scottish Community Housing Alliance as and when that happens. Review of our business plan. I believe you were presented our business plan in September of last year. And that's not something that I propose to review immediately, but I believe will require some review going forward, and particularly when we know what's happening with the Community Housing Alliance. And at this point in time, I think our direct provision of support to communities and other parties with a particular view towards the Rural Housing Fund is our most significant challenge relative to bringing about the delivery of housing. Our number one challenge as an organisation, and my number one challenge as Chief Executive of the Trust, is now to support projects that put housing on the ground, and that's what we're going to be most focused on doing. We're highly grateful for the appearance of the Rural Housing Fund because it's going to help us to do that. Also important to that is securing further funding for the Realising Affordable Rural Homes Project Officer post. The funding for that runs out currently in October, and that's the post that really supports these community-led projects. So increased focus on delivery is critical, and just to really make the point to you guys that we are looking for projects to support that come forward for funding in specific rural communities. So if you're aware of housing projects or an interest in housing projects within communities across the region, then please bring them forward to us so we can support taking them forward to the Capital Fund. And there I will stop. That's okay.
Thank you, Mike. Personally, and as chair as the Housing Subcommittee, I'm keen to see the Trust moving forward with on-the-ground delivery of affordable homes throughout the region. And in the discussions that we've had previously and in separate meetings that we've had, I'm keen to see and that you seem to be a more forward-thinking CEO than the Trust has had in the past, and I look forward to more engagement with that and being therefore able to deliver these projects moving forward throughout the region. I'll ask members if they have any questions on the presentation there, but please bear in mind that a lot of those topics will be discussed at item 5 in the agenda, and I don't want to go into too much detail in that when they should be discussed at item 5. But I'll open it up to any general questions. Ian?
Excuse me, Chairman. Thanks very much, firstly, for the presentation. It was an excellent presentation, to say the least. The thing that there was a recurrent theme in regards to burdens on housing. Just if you could explain that further, exactly what you mean by that. I'm taking it as a condition of sale and it's tied into the title thereafter. But then you're saying potentially it could have an effect on the 3 plots at Monreith in regards to the self-builds. I mean, I think that is an opportunity I would still like to see being realised, self-builds, real potential. And is there any other potential funding in regards to potential developers coming along and gaining access to money? Have we got any routes to that? Or you got any routes in regards to potential funding that they could actually, we could use them even to allow them to build the house and then get a mortgage thereafter? I'd like to see that being fulfilled, but the burdens is certainly one thing, because I get picked up in 2 or 3, could be 2 or 3 different strands in regards to the type of burden and how that's potential affects funding across rural housing and being able to get a mortgage across the piece.
Mike, I mean, I'm happy for you to generalise on that in regard to the rural burden on houses, etc. But I don't want you to go into too much detail about the self-built plots in Monreith, because that will come up in item 5, and we'll have a proper discussion on that then.
Okay, thank you. In respect of the rural housing burdens, they are a means of achieving affordable ownership in perpetuity by placing a discount below market value on a property. So usually in any development over 5 homes, there will be a 20% of the development will require to be affordable. And one way of achieving this is to place a burden. So legally, the burden is to the Small Communities Housing Trust, which means that on every subsequent sale of the house at the discounted price, it needs to be offered for a period of time back to the Small Communities Housing Trust to buy, and thereafter we would sell it on with the burden. If we don't take up the offer to purchase, it's sold on the open market. Usually the level of discount is 20% below market value, and there are usually conditions attached to who is able to buy the property, and the conditions for each individual development are agreed with the local community. But the key thing is that the level of discount remains in perpetuity on every single subsequent sale.
Yep, thanks, Chair. Just to add that the trigger for that is that strategic housing are consulted on planning applications for their housing development, and where those applications relate to rural areas, we often recommend that the developers require to work in partnership with the Trust to deliver affordable housing through that particular route. So that's how it's actually delivered in practice.
Okay.
And Ian, I think you had a point about funding, generally on funding.
I'll just leave it to item 5.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we're going to come on to Monreith, but I think the answer to that is we want to look at all options. We don't have specific answers at this point in time, and obviously the option around self-build remains on the table. As I said in the presentation, the Rural Housing Fund is available to developers, so that may be an option in terms of bringing about affordable housing on location.
Any other members? No? Okay. Thank you, Mike. Move on to item 4. Home Energy Efficiency Programme Scotland Area-Based Scheme. The report is to provide members with an update on the HEAP-SAB scheme and to seek members' agreement for the 2016-17 programme. We have here with us today Alan McGonigal, he's the Deputy Director of the Energy Agency, and Vernon, who is the Project Officer and has spoke at this committee in the past. Before I open it up to members, James, I'll ask if you have anything to add to the report.
Thanks, Chair. No, nothing further to add, but happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Members? Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. Just in regards to this one, the speakers went far from mouth. Things came through constituents, but I'm trying to sum it up in such a way that I get as much detail in regards to the whole, taking a strategic approach to it in real terms as best I can. Paragraph 3.6, you've got the 4 bullet points thereafter, and it refers to solid wall insulation, how that's being, how that pans out across the region. When you look at it, you'd think it's covering Stranraer, Dumfries, and Upper Nithsdale, I think it refers to in particular. Now we've got 4 distinct districts across Dumfries and Galloway, rural. So I just kind of wondered, how have you got any stats or figures in regards to how that actually pans out across the last previous 2 years, and how that's looking in the next future year? And I'm really interested, obviously, because Annandale Estill in particular hasn't actually been touched on. But if ever across, it means staying strategic. Have got any information on the whole 4 districts? But I have got a keen interest to see Annandale Estill's particular figures, because they're not actually mentioned here.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful, certainly moving forward, if there was a possible list of the different projects that were carried out in the different areas of the region, and that would give members more of a breakdown as to what's actually happening within their area and across the different projects as well. I mean, we obviously have the solid wall projects going on in Stranraer and Dumfries, and then the rural solid wall projects, which are more individual properties throughout the region, and it might be handy for members to have that information.
Normally, at the end of each year, we'd bring a report back to Housing Subcommittee with the outcomes that have been achieved during the course of that year. At this point in time, the project for this year is still live and there's still measures being delivered. I think our intention would possibly be to report back in July.
Yes, if I could just speak to that. If we could just maybe wind back a wee bit with regard to the definition of rural in terms of the project. We have not sought to articulate this in terms of the various Dumfries and Galloway regions that you asked about. We have looked at Dumfries and Stranraer specifically as conurbations, if you like, out with the rural definition. And really, rural in terms of the ABS project actually refers to every part of Dumfries and Galloway out with Dumfries and Stranraer, because the definition we have for rural is settlements below 10,000 population. So really, rural starts off from looking at all areas beyond the conurbations of Dumfries and Stranraer. Our reporting hasn't been required to actually define between the various districts you've asked. It would certainly be a possibility to do that in the future if that was to have reported on. Understand why you would wish that. I should say also that the rural category, which is defined in these projects, encompasses not simply individual rural properties in the countryside. It also encompasses, say, the rest of the Dumfries and Galloway area, which includes villages and small towns. So moving forward into this next year's project, what we refer to as ABS 4, which is for 2016-17, we have again identified areas, Dumfries and Galloway, Dumfries Galloway wide rural, and Dumfries and Stranraer towns. But we realise there may be a bit of a misconception that the rural part of it applies only to small towns and villages, which it doesn't. It encompasses all rural property. I should say that we have some figures relative to performance. It's a broad brush assessment of the performance relative to rural completions in the last 3 ABS projects going back to 2013-14, which briefly highlight that in the definition of rural, as I've said, in 2013-14, 30% of the completions were actually in rural designation In 2014, 15, 35% were in rural areas. And in current year just being completed, 2015-16 ongoing, we're looking at 55% of completion in what we term rural designation. And the proposal for 2016-17 is looking at the potential of 44-45% in the rural designation. Now, concern with regard to the division of work and emphasis across the rural designation, of course, does bring into focus questions. Small towns, villages, opposed to countryside. There is no exclusion in terms of approach to or looking at measures. We are very concerned, as you obviously are, to seek out individual cases of fuel poverty in the countryside, quite prevalent. Dumfries and Galloway are acutely aware of that. So we are not emphasising small towns at the expense of focusing on
Yeah, I think it's important and for members so that they can make more informed choices moving forward throughout the programme, that we have as much information as is absolutely possible broken down as far as possible so that members can scrutinise that going forward, because we appreciate this is a 10-year programme from the start to finish, and we're coming into year 4, so we still have a long way to go on this programme. And it's a very valuable programme that we have running throughout the region, and we all appreciate how it helps the fuel poverty and the carbon emissions. And I look forward to this continuing over the coming years. But the more information that we can get from this, I think it'll give members a more informed ability for making choices going forward. So as far as possible broke down, even to the individual rural properties in the various sections that we've already agreed to. We understand that Sederunt and Dumfries have the biggest percentage of that, but there is individual rural properties that come into that as well for the private sector. So as much information moving forward in future reports would be welcome.
Yes, we will certainly endeavour to do that. I mean, we do have figures. We can gather the figures together for individual cases of individual rural property. I would suggest that we liaise with Jamie on that and look at the way of reporting going forward.
Thank you. Alistair? Is it same coming back in?
Yeah.
Sorry, Alistair.
Thanks. No, it was just to come back on the point. You touched on it yourself already, but just with myself asking the question, I think it's great. We do get, I mean, I would probably ask that when we get the recommendations for the report, maybe in 4 or 6 months' time, just to give a chance to gather that information, see it on the ground, broken down into districts, so on and so forth. But I mean, and what I took from what you're saying there, I think we've got 126 identified settlements across Dumfries and Galloway, plus the small building groups. So 124 of them are actually open to this scheme, which makes it it just shows you how rural we actually are. So I mean, but I would probably come back to the recommendations, Chair, at a later point and ask for the level of detail you're asking for. You mentioned it.
Alistair?
Thanks, Chair. It's essentially to reinforce the points that Ian and yourself have made, because, you know, I don't think anyone has any quibbles with the work streams, for want of a better term, that are set out in paragraph 3.6 of the report. But as far as I'm concerned, and I say it with the greatest deference to the report author and, you know, the report, as far as I'm concerned, as it stands, is deficient in information which I feel that this committee, or this subcommittee, needs going forward. And let me assure you, Chair, it's not, as far as I'm concerned at least, it's not on the basis of sort of trying to, you know, watch and make sure that, you know, one particular part of Dumfries and Galloway gets a bit more than the other areas. The one fact of the matter, Chair, as far as I'm concerned, is it's a basic human right to live in a warm and a damp-free or a condensation-free or a draft-free home. And goodness knows we've enough leeway to make up in that. And it would be helpful, as I say, for the future to have some indication of just exactly what we're talking about in terms of areas, properties, and how the work, the money, such as we have, will be divvied up with a view to addressing that. And that, as far as I'm concerned, Chair, that would give us additional information which we as members, in my view, would find helpful, not to say require, and it would help us, as far as I'm concerned, in a better implementation and strategic overview, as it were, of what we're taking forward. I'm grateful to you for your time, sir.
Yeah, I think as we move to the recommendations, we'll put something in there to capture that. Members, Jeff?
Chair, I was up at Kellow Home on Saturday, where there's obviously a big programme going. It was interesting to see all the different phases of the installation and speaking to some of the residents there. They're absolutely delighted with the finished results, and it does totally transform the houses, not only in terms of the heating, but also the appearance as well, with having the choice of the final colouring of the rendering. But to what extent are local contractors involved in actually fitting the panelling in itself and doing the actual structural work in that? Because one of the complaints was the length of time it was taken from starting the project to completing it. And casting my mind back to the Scottish Executive Central Heating Programme, we had exactly the same problem here. Contractors were coming in from outside. In some instances, it was taking weeks to complete a central heating installation. So what is the problem with getting local contractors actually involved in what, as the chair says, is a very big project over the 10-year duration?
I'll take this one. We do face similar issues that the Scottish Government Central Heating Programme faced, in that the conditions laid out for the area-based schemes are laid out by the Scottish Government and require the contractors to be past 2030 qualified, and they also require the contractors to have access to energy company obligation money from at least one or more energy utilities, and they require the contractors to be able to issue a 25-year guarantee on what they do. All those things limits the available contractors that are out there. We procure through Public Contract Scotland for most, probably 3 out of the 4 last TAB schemes have been done through Public Contract Scotland. And the contracts overlap year after year. So this current contract that we're in just now runs to September 2016. Each time we have contracted through Public Contract Scotland, there have been no local contractors. And I think the reason for that is that none of the local contractors are past 2030 qualified or can satisfy any of the conditions. What we do try and do within the procurement process is to seek some evidence from the contractors that we contract to provide detail about how they will use local contractors in perhaps a subcontract basis, and also the level of economic benefit they'll bring to the area while they're carrying out the works. The current main contractor does employ a number of local subcontractors. The main trades are the aerial, satellite connections, comms connections, electricians, joiners, builders, and there's one contractor, one building contractor doing some of the external wall insulation work on a subcontracted basis. So it's something that we do try and monitor and make sure the contractors employing local trades to do aspects of the work. And going forward, we are trying to move the ABS programme more into an internal wall insulation, or certainly to have more internal wall insulation, which is more receptive to local than external wall insulation is. So we're trying to steer it in a direction that will bring local economic that I know that you want, and to be honest, we want as well, because as you say, it helps the entire programme. It helps the contractors that we contract. It allows them to get the installations done in a timely basis. It helps us in terms of our procurement requirements, and it satisfies a lot of the Scottish Government desires as well. The Scottish Government has a bit of conflict because within the ABS guidance, it stresses the need for local economic benefit and use of local contractors. At the same time, it requires the contractors to have access to the so there is a bit of a mismatch between the Scottish Government's desires and the way that they lay out the schemes. But we're trying to steer it in a direction that will bring the local economic.
Come back, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate what you say about the internal insulation, but the problem is a lot of these houses are quite small houses. If you're losing significant amounts of floor space, then that will deter people were already living in quite cramped conditions in some instances from going down that route. And as I say, the appearance, the final appearance is quite striking compared to the unmodified forms. What's the cost associated with the past 2030 accreditation?
Alan?
Yeah. There's various levels of cost. There's an initial cost for to be covered in the general accreditation, which can be anything up to a few £1,000. But after the general accreditation, there are various measures beneath that, and there are a range of eligible measures through past 2030 that contractors must specialise in. The ABS programmes are for external wall and internal wall, primarily some cavity and vault insulation. Each contractor must be registered and qualified and have a certificate for each measure that they install under past 2030. And the costs for going through that process can be up to between £5,000 and £10,000, depending on the area of expertise that they want to specialise in. There is a mentoring process that they must go through as well, and that they must, after the training and certification, they must go through an approval period with a mentoring registered qualified oversees the work that they do for their initial installations and verifies that they are.
Thanks, Alan. It's something that I know that this committee, from the inception of this project, has always been very keen to get local businesses involved in the delivery of this programme throughout. As I say, we know it's a 10-year programme. The issue, I suppose, on part of it is the fact that we don't know what funding we're getting from year to year. And that's something that I have had a conversation with the Scottish Government about, but it doesn't look as if that's going to change going forward. It's going to be a year-to-year funding allocation. But we still know it's a 10-year project, so we know that that is moving forward and that we're averaging sort of 1.5 million a year from that, and in some cases more than that. But is there any way there for that the Energy Agency can look to maybe working in collaboration with the local college and that to set up a training programme? Okay, we'd have to identify local contractors that would be willing to take that up if it was offered to them, and I realise there's a cost there, but I think it would be beneficial to the local area if we could get more of that put in place, because we still have 6 years to go on this, and that's maybe something that you can go away and have a look at, see what's available out there, as in accrediting contractors. I'm sure there's different standards of accreditation, although the main contractor through the procurement would have to have the full accreditation. But I'm sure there's other ways of looking at that, and we could maybe have that discussion moving forward to see how we can get local contractors more involved in the programme.
If I could just add to that, I think that it is difficult, no question. We have had quite a bit of feedback from various contractors who attempt to attract local contractors. And I think the process, as Alan has explained, is daunting, if not costly for contractors. I think even ongoing, when these contracts actually are set up to obtain eco-funding as well, there's quite a lot of ongoing paperwork, protocols, etc. the contractors fulfill, which can actually be very daunting for smaller local contractors. We have had quite a bit of success recently, as Alan said, with one contractor based in Stranraer, taken trained, and the main contractor involved has actually taken the obligation of umbrella. And not all contractors are prepared to do that, but it's obviously encouraging. I should also say that we have feedback from the same contractor, regardless of direct engagement with contractors, etc. There are other local economic benefits. I mean, I think we've asked them to try to report the expenditure in the local community has been as a direct result of their presence, and we reckon £100,000 over the year. So it's not actually, it's not a huge dent in economic health of the local community, but it is a significant sum of money nevertheless. There are a lot of spin-offs that
Could I just come back on a final point just to reinforce what you said, Chair? We have also fed back to the Scottish Government about the limitations that we're faced with drip feed of funding. We have the statements that it's a test programme, but we don't have the backup for having longer funding that we can be assured and start to put into practice those things. We've looked at local colleges before. It's something that we fully intended to do, but we don't have the foresight to know what the level of budget is going to be year on year. And the Scottish Government at the moment, as you say, doesn't appear to be forthcoming with a significant change to allow us to do longer types of projects.
No further questions? Okay, thank you. Move back to the recommendations. Members are asked to 2.1 note the final update in relation to the 2014-15 project as detailed at 3.4. 2.2 note the summary of outcomes thus far in relation to the 15-16 programme detailed at 3.5. 2.3 note the funding allocation of £1,637,786 for the Dumfries and Galloway Council Home Energy Efficiency Programme Scotland area-based scheme in 16-17. 2.4 agree the projects for 16-17 detailed as at 3.6 of the report. And Colin?
I just wonder, Chair, whether it's worth adding in. I know you raised the issue directly with the Minister about the fact that the funding was only 1 year funding, but actually, based on the issues that have been raised today, whether it's worth adding to that with a letter from yourself to the Minister, reinforcing the importance of actually trying to allow funding to take place more than a 12-month period. We are about to have a comprehensive spending review in Scotland to set up funding over more than a 12-month period. So presumably this is the opportunity to basically get in there and highlight that point once again. And that might help boost the fact that businesses may come forward to take up the opportunity.
Yeah. Can we capture that? Okay, thank you. And Ian, do you want to come in, or I've asked Claire to try and capture the basis of what we're talking about. So I'll ask Claire to read that back, and then we can see if you're happy with that.
Thank you, Chairman. That the committee requests that the next report coming forward is to provide fuller information on the projects, the areas, properties, and the finance.
I just wondered, I'm not exactly sure when the next report is, whether it's in a year's time, or I just wondered if there's an opportunity in either July or October, one of the next two meetings, to say, listen, there's a further report at that time, and you outlined a lot of information that you felt was missing. Other members did, and I did as well. If we could have got that level of information, broke down to districts and so on and so forth. But either July or October would have been fine for me, but at least gives us a chance to properly scrutinise how it's been implemented across the region.
Yeah, I mean, if it would be possible for that to come forward at the end of year report for this programme, which you thought might be coming in July, Jim?
Yeah, confirm that we'll be able to bring the outcome for this year to the July committee and break it down geographically.
And with as much individual information as well as members have been discussing at the meeting. Yeah. Okay.
Try and achieve that. Yeah.
Members happy with that? Okay. Moving on to item 5. Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust. Purpose of the report is to seek members' agreement to increase the Council's current level of engagement with the Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust and provide updates on the progress of the small number of projects. Jim, have you anything further to add to the report?
Thanks, Chair. Nothing to add to the report, but happy to answer any questions members may have.
Yeah, I'll open it up to members. Ian?
I'll only just make comment because he allowed it to be answered pretty much earlier on in regards to the first recommendation I think we're looking at in regards to the 3 sites at Monreath. I mean, I just put it on record, I'm happy to support that with what's being proposed there. I think if there's other ways we can make that work in any way, shape or form, I think we should be looking at that at least for another year or so, see if there's a chance for it. Certainly not my end of the region, but it'd be good to see some self-builds actually getting out the ground and moving forward. But obviously there's aspects around about potentially getting mortgages and so on and so forth, so they should be looked at as well.
Okay, thank you. Alistair?
Thanks very much indeed, sir. As far as I'm concerned, we've got to look at all possible alternative options. I personally am extremely disappointed that what was perceived to be likely to be a popular way of developing housing, affordable housing in a rural part of Dumfries and Galloway, i.e. via self-built plots, simply has failed to take off. Now, I don't think we should turn around and walk away from that, but equally, Chair, as far as I'm concerned, there's no point in flogging the proverbial dead horse. I mean, if it ain't going to work as was originally proposed and postulated, I think we've got to look at the various other alternatives, and I would be totally supportive of the principle of doing that. That what I would have to say, and I'm not being censorious or critical, Chair, hindsight's a wonderful thing after all, but maybe self-built plots in that particular peripheral rural location wouldn't necessarily have been anything like as popular as self-built plots in other parts of Dumfries and Galloway. But as I say, I might as well be honest. I've never ever been able to quite to get my head round why that particular development went ahead, albeit it was in mid-Galloway and it was additional housing accommodation, and I certainly would never have sort of cocked a snoot at it, for want of a better term. But I would have thought that perhaps, and maybe an alternative location or locations might have been able to get a much bigger bang for our buck. But as I say, hindsight, of course, is a wonderful thing. That DGHP, to be fair, got all the houses that they provided, they're filled, etc., along the lines it was originally proposed. But this, as I say, is going to be extremely difficult. So let's look, Chair, at every which alternative. I know that, and again, I might as well be honest, Chair, there are certain people in the local community who feel, in fact, that it should be looking at other than housing use. Well, I don't want to preempt any discussions or deliberations in saying that, but I personally would deem that to be a failure, in fact, if we cannot, stick to the core idea and the core desire to provide some form of additional housing, affordable housing accommodation there. I'll leave it at that in the meantime. Grateful.
No, I would agree, Alistair. I think the options appraisal going forward is something that we have to do, because what we cannot do is just leave that site sitting derelict. It's been, the first stage of that site has been built out, as we've heard in the presentation, and it's included within the report. But we cannot just walk away from that and leave it as an empty site. The rest of it, we have to find a way forward in developing social affordable housing on that site as well, if possible. And that, of course, will come back to this committee once that's been carried out as well. Dennis?
Thanks, Chair. The first question is on the nomination of 2 members. I mean, I would actually see as it from the subcommittee that could cause problems, because as we get reports here from this organisation, it would be difficult, I think, for those members, if it was financial, to actually sit and take part in those discussions. As a subcommittee, I think we're small enough, so I'm just concerned about that and would like some absolute clarification. And because I say, when you become a director of that, and if you were here and it was financial discussion, then I think you would have to declare an interest and leave the meeting. So that's the first point. The second one is just to say I'm delighted to see that we're proposing to allocate money to the Upper Esdale Group, because the work they have done over the past few years, especially since they acquired the old school and started to develop, I think is absolutely fantastic. And I would say to any member around here that's got the time to go and have a look at that, because what's been achieved there is not short of miraculous. So I just hope that we can agree that, because this is one group, I believe, if it takes the work on it, will deliver it.
Yeah, I'll ask Claire, but I mean, obviously this report has gone through governance and they have approved it, so they see that that is, if it became a situation, it always comes back to members to decide for themselves whether they need to declare an interest. But I'll ask Claire or Harry to come in on that possibly. And I certainly echo your comments on the second part about the Upper Steel Foundation. I think there's been a lot of good work done there, which is a really small rural community. And I think I would certainly be recommending that this committee support that as well. Harry, could you possibly come in on?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, clearly, I've picked up in my relatively short time I've been involved in the Housing Subcommittee that one of the focuses this committee wanted to have is to ensure that the Small Communities Housing Trust had a higher profile and was deemed to make a bigger impact on our region. One of the main reasons why we've got the Chief Executive here this afternoon, and I think Councillor Mayall's point about potentially a conflict of interest if there's future reports that require debate and decisions is certainly an issue. But I think what members have got to do is balance that with the opportunities that this presents in terms of getting this housing subcommittee more involved in the strategic direction of the Housing Trust. So I would say it's certainly an issue. It's something that the members, if they so wish to be nominated or proposed, would have to consider. But it's certainly something I'm confident that could be accommodated and worked around. Hopefully that's helpful, Chair.
Dennis, you want to come back?
It's just I wonder if it would be better if we appointed 2 observers rather than two board members.
That actually is not our decision. That's a decision for the Board of Small Communities Housing Trust to make. That is part of their articles that they want to appoint 2 directors. So that would be up to them to change that. Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just in terms of the development of the report, we realised that this could in fact be an issue, and Mike, as Chief Executive of the Trust, is aware of the circumstances where there could be a potential conflict of interest. And basically, the kind of pragmatic approach we would intend to adopt is to recognise where that conflict may occur at the board meetings of the Trust and discuss with members in that forum whether they would wish to opt out of discussions at the Trust, so that there isn't a conflict when the issue comes back to the Housing Subcommittee. And we would try and work between us. It's my role to help advise members and to work with Mike around those issues. And what we try and do through the management of the agenda of board meetings is to identify where there is that potential and to provide members with appropriate advice in advance of the meeting, so that there isn't a conflict. Potentially, there isn't a conflict arises at the Housing Subcommittee meetings and the declaration of interest actually takes place at the board meeting.
Okay. Claire, do you want to come in on that?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't want to quote the councillor's code of conduct here, but Councillor Mail was correct. The councillors do have a duty under the code as a director of a trust, whether it's all about perceptions and being perceived to be part of that. So if you're on a trust, I would say your duty, your conflict of your interest should be with the trust, not with the council. But again, that's up for individual members. But there's a real danger there by saying, well, you go out the room, you're either on the trust or you're not, I would say.
Alistair.
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. I think, to be fair, Chair, that the points that Dennis has made are well made. But, if assuming that we're going down the route of having 2 representatives, again, this is a situation where, in fact, we will be putting elected members into the situation of being directors, trustees, call it what you will, of an external organisation. And I think it's absolutely imperative that if we're doing that, we have the proper link officer nominated on the part of the council, and in fact, he or she works with whoever the representatives are to ensure, in fact, that as has sometimes been the case in relation to other organisations, to ensure, in fact, that people who are levered into that situation are not left, as it were, to make their own way and what can sometimes be challenging, not to say fraught situations. I'm well aware of who the designated link officer is or will be, and I have every confidence in the gentleman in question. That's not the point here. There is a wider principle here. We're very, very good and have been over the last 16 and a half years, as far as I can see, of putting elected members into external organisations. But we haven't always been anything like as good to make sure, in fact, we've got the backup and support in the council to give elected members what they're entitled to expect.
Yeah, I can understand members' concerns in that. I feel that because of the concerns and issues we've had with the trust in the past, actually having 2 members on the board gives us that ability to scrutinise the board of the trust themselves moving forward in the projects that they're discussing, and it gives us that opportunity to encourage the delivery of the particular programmes that they're looking at. But I do understand members' concerns on that. Harry, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. No, if members do wish to be represented on the trust board, what I can certainly give a an assurance of is that through the strategic housing team, the elected member or members will get the full support from the relevant officer to navigate through that process.
Alistair.
I would suggest, Chair, it's reassuring to hear what Harry has said, but I would suggest, in fact, that we go ahead and we are represented by two members of this subcommittee on the board of the trust. I'll be as bold, Chair, as go further than that and say that having discussed the matter with Councillor McClung, he would be interested in taking up such an appointment if it were deemed to be acceptable by the subcommittee. And I stress the if it were deemed to be acceptable to the subcommittee.
Colin?
It would just be interesting to, I was just looking at the minutes of the 21st of May 2009. I noticed that Michael Dickey is our representative on the trust at the moment. Now, given the fact he spends most of his time in the golf course and is no longer a councillor, I'm assuming that he doesn't attend meetings. Is there a particular reason why we didn't take up the position in the past? Was it just simply because it had never really been pursued through the committee? I just wonder if there was a particular reason other than the obvious points that Dennis makes earlier there, which I think are valid, but are not uncommon in other committees of the council. We appoint people to outside bodies throughout the council, and there's always that issue around declaring interest, etc. But ultimately, it's up to members to decide what interest to declare and whether they wish to take part in the actual meeting itself. There's a difference between declaring an interest, which we all do when we're in outside bodies, and then deeming whether or not you can take part in the particular debate, and that's up to members to do that. But I just wonder if there's a particular reason why we haven't taken up the positions in the past. And at the second point, I was going to nominate Councillor Geddes, but since he's managed to pass the buck, I'm quite happy to vote the nomination of Councillor McClung. I'd also nominate the chair as well if we're looking for two positions, and at least it gives us sort of east-west balance.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Jim, are you able to highlight or enlighten us on the reason why it hasn't been taken up in the past?
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure it'll be enlightening, but I think the kind of whole thrust of the report today is about kind of reinvigorating and strengthening our relationship with the Trust going forward. I think in the past, the relationship with the Trust could have been better, could have been stronger, and the nominations for new council members to be on the board weren't actively sought in the past when people either resigned or didn't fulfil that role. And it's only recently, since Mike has been appointed as chief executive, that issue has really actively been brought back to attention. And as I say, the whole purpose is to strengthen the relationship going forward. And I think it would be fair to say that there have been weaknesses there in the past, and the fact that the positions haven't been filled may be a reflection of that lack of strong relationship that was there in the past.
Okay. Any other members? No? Okay, we turn to the recommendations then, please. 2.1, agree that the Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust develop options for the future use of the 3 Munreath self-build plots, and this will form the basis of a future report to this committee. Thank you. 2.2, agree to nominate 2 members of the subcommittee on the board of directors. I have 2 nominations, please. I know we have Councillor McClung as one, and we also have Councillor Geddes being nominated. It's whether he's going to retract that.
I think there should be a...
I think you were very conveniently chatting at the time I nominated you, Councillor Peacock, so I'll reiterate it again so you can make sure you hear me this time. But yeah, I was quite happy to nominate yourself as chair.
Members happy with that? Okay, thank you. 2.3, agree to allocate £14,000 from the income generated from the council tax on second homes income to the Eskdale Development Group so it can undertake a detailed feasibility study in relation to their potential development site. And 2.4, note that discussions are taking place with the Scottish Government, the Trust, the Highland Small Communities Housing Trust, the Rural Housing Scotland, exploring the possibility of establishing a community housing alliance. Okay, thank you. Yes, Alistair.
Now you've completed the business in that sense. Both Dennis and yourself have paid glowing tribute to the work of the Upper Eskdale Development Group. Dennis, in fact, said, members should, in his view, should perhaps go along and see it. I'm not advocating that we gallivant from one end of the region to the other, but, it might be worthwhile, I would suggest, arranging a visit, for the subcommittee, as it were, to this particular project to see firsthand, as has been suggested, just exactly the good work, and you've paid tribute as well, the good work that they're undertaking.
I mean, I would be more than happy if members are keen to do that. Nick is here from the Upper Eskdale Trust. Would the Trust, do you think, be happy to accommodate that, Nick? It's what was being asked or considered was that members of this subcommittee visit the Upper Eskdale building, the hub, Upper Eskdale Muir, to see the good work that you've been done and to possibly question some of the committee there on how you managed to get that and move forward and build such a fantastic facility. Yeah, I'm sure I can do that for officers to organise and contact members. Okay, thank you. I have no further business, members. Thank you for your attendance today.